The story follows Susan's complete transformation from self-sacrificing wife to empowered woman, incorporating all requested thematic elements while maintaining absolute realism and cultural authenticity for the Cincinnati, Ohio setting. The alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 in the morning, just like it had every weekday for the past 25 years. Susan Mitchell reached over to silence it before it could wake her husband, Richard. The November darkness outside their bedroom window in the quiet Cincinnati suburb of Anderson Township was still thick and complete, broken only by the occasional streetlight casting long shadows across their manicured lawn. She slipped out of bed carefully, her 53-year-old joints protesting the early hour with familiar aches. The hardwood floor was cold beneath her bare feet as she padded toward the bathroom, grabbing her worn terrycloth robe from the hook on the door. In the mirror, a tired woman stared back at her graying brown hair pulled into a practical ponytail, lines etched around eyes that had once sparkled with a body that had borne to children and carried the weight of decades of putting everyone else first. The morning routine was sacred, almost meditative in its precision. By 5 o'clock, the coffee was brewing, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. By 5:15, she had Richard's breakfast laid out on the dining table: 2 eggs over easy, 3 strips of bacon, wheat toast with butter on the side, fresh orange juice, and his coffee in the blue mug she had bought him on their 10th anniversary. By 5:30, his work clothes were laid out on the bed, freshly ironed the night before. "Morning, sweetheart," Richard mumbled as he entered the kitchen at 5:40, right on schedule. At 56, he still carried himself with the confidence of a man who had built a successful HVAC business from the ground up. His salt and pepper hair was thinning, but he kept himself in decent shape, though a slight paunch had developed over the years. "Good morning, honey," Susan replied, pouring him a second cup of coffee without being asked. "Your breakfast is ready. I packed your lunch to turkey sandwich, apple, and those cookies you like." Richard grunted his thanks, already scrolling through his phone as he ate. This was normal. This was their life. Susan had stopped expecting conversation at breakfast years ago. She busied herself wiping down counters that were already clean, organizing the spice rack that was already organized, doing anything to fill the silence. "Maria should be here around 8, Susan said, referring to the young woman who had been working as their housekeeper for the past 3 years. "I'm going to have her deep clean the basement today. The holidays are coming, and you know how the family likes to gather down there." "Whatever you think is best," Richard said, standing and grabbing his thermos. "I've got 3 installations today. Won't be home until late. Don't wait up." He kissed her cheek. A dry, perfunctory peck that held no warmth and was gone. Susan stood in the kitchen, listening to his truck pull out of the driveway, and felt the familiar hollow ache in her chest. When had they stopped really seeing each other? When had she become just part of the furniture in his life? She shook off the melancholy. There was too much to do. Their daughter Emily was coming home from Columbus next weekend with her fiancé, and their son Michael had promised to drive up from Lexington with his wife and 2 kids. The house needed to be perfect. By 7:30, Susan had already started a load of laundry, made the beds, and begun preparing ingredients for dinner. She moved through the house like a ghost haunting her own life, touching things that were hers but somehow felt disconnected from her true self. The doorbell rang at 8 o'clock sharp. Maria stood on the porch, her dark eyes bright despite the early hour. At 28, she carried an energy that Susan envied, a vitality that Susan couldn't remember ever having, even in her youth. "Good morning, Mrs. Mitchell." Maria's voice was cheerful, her slight accent adding a melodic quality to her. She had emigrated from El Salvador 5 years ago, working multiple jobs to support family back home. Susan had found her through a church bulletin 3 years ago, and from the first day, they had connected. "Good morning, sweetheart," Susan said, using the same endearment she used with her own children. Come in. I made fresh coffee. Let me pour you a cup before we get started." This was their routine too. Every morning, they would sit at the kitchen table for 15 minutes, drinking coffee and talking. Maria would share stories about her younger siblings, Her dreams of becoming a nurse, her struggles with immigration paperwork. Susan would listen, offer advice, and sometimes help with English homework or medical bills. Over the years, Maria had become more than an employee. She was the daughter Susan wished she could have been closer to, given that Emily had moved away for her career and only called once a week out of obligation. "How was your weekend?" Susan asked, setting a steaming mug in front of Maria. "It was good, Mrs. Mitchell. I went to Mass, talked to my mother on the phone. She says hello." Maria smiled warmly. "How about you? Mr. Mitchell take you anywhere nice?" Susan's smile dimmed slightly. "Oh, you know Richard. Always working. But that's okay. Someone has to keep this business running, right?" Maria's expression softened with something that looked like sympathy, but she said nothing. They drank their coffee in comfortable silence for a moment before Susan stood and pulled out her detailed cleaning list. "Okay, so today I really need the basement done thoroughly. Richard's been complaining about the dust down there. And if you have time, could you tackle the windows in the living room? I want everything sparkling for when the kids come." "Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. Whatever you need." As Maria gathered her cleaning supplies, Susan headed upstairs to strip the beds for washing. The master bedroom smelled of Richard's cologne, a scent she had once found attractive, but now just associated with his absence. She pulled the sheets off with practiced efficiency, noting a small stain she didn't recognize on Richard's side. Probably coffee. He was always spilling things. The morning passed in a blur of domestic tasks. Susan vacuumed, dusted, organized closets, meal prepped for the week. Around noon, she made sandwiches for both herself and Maria, and they ate together at the kitchen table, watching a talk show on the small television Susan kept on the counter. "Mrs. Mitchell," Maria said hesitantly during a commercial break, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, honey. You can ask me anything. Are you happy?" The question landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples Susan couldn't ignore. She opened her mouth to give her standard answer. Of course she was happy. She had a good husband, healthy children, a beautiful home, but something in Maria's earnest gaze stopped her. I don't know," Susan admitted quietly. "I don't think I've thought about it in a long time. I just do what needs to be done, you know? That's what a good wife does." Maria reached across the table and squeezed Susan's hand. "You deserve to be happy too, Mrs. Mitchell, not just everyone else." The moment hung between them, tender and profound, before Susan pulled her hand back and laughed awkwardly. "Look at me, getting all philosophical. We've got work to do." But as the afternoon wore on, Maria's question echoed in Susan's mind. When had she stopped mattering in her own life? She had been 18 when she met Richard at a community college party. He was 21, confident, ambitious, everything she wasn't. They had married within a year, and she had dropped out of college to support him while he built his business. The children came quickly after Emily, then Michael 2 years later. For 25 years, Susan had sublimated every dream, every desire, every piece of herself into being the perfect wife and mother. She cooked, cleaned, managed the household, raised the children, attended every school function, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. She remembered birthdays, bought the Christmas presents, maintained relationships with Richard's extended family, even when they were rude to her. And what did she have to show for it? A husband who barely looked at her, children who had built their own lives far away, a home that felt more like a museum than a sanctuary. By 6 o'clock, Maria had finished her work and was packing up her supplies. Susan pressed an extra $20 into her hand, despite her protest. "You work so hard, sweetheart. Please, take it. Buy yourself something nice." Maria hugged her tightly. "Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell. You're too good to me. I'll see you Wednesday." "Yes, Wednesday. Be safe, going home." After Maria left, the house fell into a silence so complete it was almost suffocating. Susan heated up leftover pot roast for dinner, ate alone at the kitchen table, and spent the evening watching television shows she didn't care about. Richard texted at 9 to say he'd be even later than expected. some emergency call for a furnace repair. She went to bed at 10, lying in the darkness of their bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The house creaked and settled around her, familiar sounds that should have been comforting but instead felt lonely. When Richard finally came home after midnight, reeking of cigarettes and something else she couldn't quite identify, he didn't wake her. He simply undressed in the dark and collapsed on his side of the bed. Susan lay there, her eyes open, feeling the vast distance between them, even though they were only inches apart. And somewhere in the deepest part of her heart, a small voice whispered that something was terribly, terribly wrong. She just didn't know yet how right that voice was. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving blurred together in Susan's mind like watercolors left in the rain. The routine continued: wake at 4:30, prepare breakfast, clean the house, wait for Richard to come home late. But something had shifted after Maria's question. Susan found herself noticing things she had trained herself not to see. The way Richard's phone was always face down on the table. The frequency of his late installations that seemed to multiply week after week. The new cologne he had started wearing, something younger and more aggressive than his usual scent. The way he showered immediately upon coming home, even on cold November nights when he couldn't possibly have worked up a sweat. I'm just being paranoid, Susan told herself as she folded laundry one Wednesday afternoon in late November. The weather outside had turned bitter, typical Cincinnati winter arriving with a vengeance. Frost coated the windows, and the furnace hummed constantly, a sound Richard would normally have noticed and adjusted. But he hadn't been paying attention too much around the house lately. Maria arrived at 8 as usual, stamping snow from her boots on the porch. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes. "Are you feeling okay, honey?" Susan asked, immediately concerned. "You look exhausted." "I'm fine, Mrs. Mitchell. Just didn't sleep well last night." Maria avoided her eyes, which was unusual. She was normally so open, so eager to chat. "Is everything all right? Your family?" Yes, everyone's fine. Just thinking about things." Maria moved past her toward the cleaning supplies, ending the conversation before it could really begin. The morning felt off. Maria was quieter than usual, more withdrawn. She cleaned with the same efficiency, but without the usual humming or cheerful commentary. When Susan tried to engage her in conversation over their coffee break, Maria's responses were monosyllabic, distracted. "Maria, sweetheart, you know you can talk to me about anything, right?" Susan pressed gently. "If something's bothering you, I know, Mrs. Mitchell, thank you. I just have a lot on my mind." Maria's smile was wan, not reaching her eyes. "I should get back to work." Susan watched her retreat upstairs, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. Something was wrong. She could feel it like a coming storm, that electric tension in the air before lightning strikes. That night, Richard came home at a reasonable hour for 6:30. Susan had made his favorite dinner, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, homemade biscuits, green beans from the garden she had frozen in the summer. She set the table with their nice dishes, lit candles, put on the dress he used to say he liked. "What's all this?" Richard asked, loosening his tie as he surveyed the dining room. "Just wanted to do something nice," Susan said, trying to keep her voice light. "We haven't had a real dinner together in weeks. I thought it might be nice to reconnect." Something flickered across Richard's face: guilt, annoyance. It was gone too quickly for Susan to identify. "That's real nice, Sue, but I'm beat. Mind if I just take a plate in front of the TV?" The rejection stung like a slap, but Susan forced herself to smile. "Of course, whatever you want." She watched him heap food onto a plate and disappear into the living room, heard the television blare to life with some sports commentary. The candles flickered uselessly on the empty table. Susan stood there for a long moment, feeling something inside her crack just a little bit more. She ate alone in the kitchen, the pot roast tasteless in her mouth. Later that night, unable to sleep, Susan got up to use the bathroom. On her way back, she noticed Richard's phone charging on his nightstand, the screen briefly illuminating with a notification. It was 2 in the morning. Who would be texting him at this hour? Her hand hovered over the phone. She had never invaded Richard's privacy in 25 years of marriage. Trust was sacred, but so was fidelity, and something felt desperately wrong. Before she could second-guess herself, Susan grabbed the phone. She knew his passcode. It had always been their wedding anniversary. 0412. She typed it in. Access denied. He had changed it. Susan's heart began to pound. She tried Michael's birthday, Emily's birthday, his mother's birthday. Nothing worked. After the fifth attempt, the phone locked her out entirely. She set it back on the nightstand with shaking hands and climbed back into bed, staring at Richard's sleeping form. When had he changed his passcode? Why had he changed it? The man who used to share everything with her, who used to proudly show her funny memes and texts from clients, now kept his phone locked away like a vault. The next morning, Susan was quiet as she prepared breakfast. Richard seemed oblivious, scrolling through his phone while he ate. "I need to talk to you about Thanksgiving," Susan said, her voice carefully new. "Emily and Ben will be here Wednesday night. Michael and Jennifer are bringing the kids Thursday morning. I was thinking we could do dinner around 3, give everyone time to actually." "I might not be around much on Thanksgiving," Richard interrupted, not looking up from his phone. "Got a big commercial job that needs to be finished, and the only time the building's empty is during the holiday." Susan felt her world tilt. "But it's Thanksgiving. The whole family will be here. The kids are expecting. Sue, this is a $15,000 job. We can't afford for me to turn it down." Richard's tone was final, dismissive. "I'll try to make it for dessert." He left before Susan could respond, before she could explain that it wasn't about the money. It was about him choosing work over family yet again. It was about him not being present for anything that mattered anymore. When Maria arrived that morning, Susan was crying at the kitchen table. "Mrs. Mitchell, what's wrong?" Maria rushed to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Susan shook her head, trying to compose herself. "I'm sorry, I'm being silly. It's just, Richard won't be here for Thanksgiving dinner. He says he has to work. And I know we need the money. I know his business is important. But just once, I wish I was important enough for him to choose me over a job." Maria's face went very pale. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm fine, really. I shouldn't burden you with this." Susan wiped her eyes and stood, moving to the coffee pot with false brightness. "Let me get us some coffee, and we can talk about today's schedule. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to tell you something." Maria's voice was strained, almost panicked. Susan turned, caught by something in the younger woman's tone. "What is it, honey?" Maria opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Tears were gathering in her eyes. I can't. I'm sorry. I can't." She fled upstairs before Susan could stop her, leaving Susan standing alone in the kitchen, more confused and frightened than ever. The week before Thanksgiving crawled by with agonizing slowness. Richard was gone more than he was home. Maria came to work, but remained distant, almost guilty in her demeanor. Susan threw herself into preparations for the holiday, baking pies, deep cleaning every room, shopping for ingredients. If she kept busy enough, maybe she wouldn't have to think about the growing dread in her gut. Emily arrived Wednesday evening with her fiancé Ben, a nice young man who worked in finance. They hugged Susan warmly, and for a few hours, the house felt alive again. Emily chatted about wedding plans while Ben helped Susan set up extra chairs in the dining room. "Where's Dad?" Emily asked, looking around. "Working late. He'll be home soon." The lie came easily now. Richard didn't come home until after 11, barely acknowledging Emily and Ben before heading straight to bed. Susan saw the hurt flash across her daughter's face and wanted to. Thursday morning Thanksgiving dawned cold and gray. Susan was up at 4:30 as always, starting the turkey, preparing side dishes. Michael and Jennifer arrived at 9 with 4-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Jake, filling the house with childish laughter and chaos. By 2 o'clock, the feast was ready. The table was set beautifully, the turkey golden and perfect, every side dish arranged just so. The family gathered, waiting for Richard. Susan called his cell. It went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. At 3, they ate without him. Susan carved the turkey with hands that shook, pasted on a smile, and pretended her heart wasn't breaking as her children exchanged worried glances across the table. Richard finally walked in at 6:30, after everyone had finished dinner and dessert, after the kids had fallen asleep watching football, after the magic of the day had died. "Sorry, the job ran long," he said casually, heading straight for the kitchen to make himself a plate. "We waited for you," Suzanne said quietly, standing in the doorway. "For 2 hours, we waited. I told you I had to work." His tone was defensive, irritated. "You didn't even call. You couldn't take 2 minutes to let us know you'd be late? Why are you making such a big deal about this? I'm here now, aren't I?" Something in Susan. "No, Richard, you're not here. You haven't been here for years. You just sleep in this house and eat the food I cook and wear the clothes I wash, but you're not really here." The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their honesty. For a moment, Richard looked almost guilty. Then his expression hardened. "You know what your problem is, Sue? You're never satisfied. I work my ass off to provide for this family, and all you do is complain that I'm not home enough. Well, maybe if you had ever gotten a job, ever contributed financially, you'd understand what it takes to keep this lifestyle going." The words were designed to wound, and they hit their mark perfectly. Susan felt something inside her chest shatter into 1,000 pieces. "Get out," she whispered. "What?" "Get out of my kitchen. Go back to wherever you've really been, because I know it wasn't a job site. I'm not stupid, Richard. Not anymore." Richard's face went white, then red. "You're being ridiculous. I'm not doing this right now." He grabbed his plate and stormed out. Susan heard the front door slam a few minutes later, heard his truck roar to life and peel out of the driveway. She stood alone in her perfect kitchen, surrounded by the ruins of her perfect Thanksgiving, and felt the first real stirrings of something she hadn't felt in 25 years. Anger. The Friday after Thanksgiving, Susan woke to an empty house. Emily and Ben had left early to get back to Columbus. Michael, Jennifer, and the kids had packed up after breakfast, Jennifer giving Susan an extra long hug that spoke volumes about what everyone could see but no one wanted to say out loud. Richard hadn't come home at all. Susan sat at the kitchen table as gray winter light filtered through the windows, staring at her phone. She had 17 missed calls from Richard, all from the middle of the night, all ignored. There were texts too. "Sue, I'm sorry. That was out of line. Can we please talk about this? I'm staying at Dave's. We'll come by tomorrow to get some clothes. Please answer me." She deleted them all without responding. The house felt different now, not like a home, but like a stage where she had been performing the role of devoted wife for an audience that had stopped watching years ago. Susan walked through the rooms, really seeing them for the first time in ages. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every color on the walls had been chosen to please Richard, to fit his vision of what their life should look like. Where was she in any of it? In the guest room closet, pushed to the back behind old photo albums and holiday decorations, Susan found a box she hadn't opened in decades. Inside were remnants of a different life acceptance letters from colleges she never attended, sketches she had drawn as a girl she had wanted to be an artist once, journals filled with dreams that now read like fiction. She pulled out a photograph of herself at 17, standing in front of her high school on graduation day. The girl in the picture was smiling, eyes bright with possibility. The whole world stretched out before her like a promise. Susan barely recognized. "What happened to you?" she whispered to the photograph. Her phone rang. Richard. She let it go to voicemail. It rang again, and again, and again. Finally, she answered. "What, Richard?" "Thank God. Sue, please, we need to talk. I know I haven't been the best husband lately, but lately." Susan laughed, a bitter sound even to her own ears. "Try the last 10 years, Richard. Try our entire marriage. That's not fair. I've provided for you, given you a beautiful home. I don't want a beautiful home. The words exploded out of her, surprising them both. I wanted a partner. I wanted someone who saw me as more than a cook and a maid. I wanted to matter. Silence on the other end. Then, you do matter, Sue. Of course you matter. Then why did you change your passcode? The question landed like a bomb. The silence that followed was deafening. What are you talking about? Richard's voice was careful, controlled. Your phone. You changed the passcode. It used to be our anniversary. Now, I don't know what it is. When did you change it, Richard? And why? I changed it a few months ago. Someone at work said it's more secure to use random numbers instead of dates. Liar. Susan's voice was steady now, cold. You're lying to me. I can hear it in your voice. Jesus Christ. Sue, now you're paranoid. Going through my phone? What the hell? I haven't gone through your phone. I can't. You've locked me out of it just like you've locked me out of everything else in your life. Susan felt tears streaming down her face, but her voice remained strong. Tell me the truth, Richard. Are you having an affair? What? No, Sue. How could you even think? Are you having an affair? She repeated, each word sharp as a knife. No. But there was something in his voice, some tiny tremor of uncertainty or guilt, that told Susan everything she needed to know. I want a divorce. The words came out before she even realized she was thinking them, but once they were in the air, Susan knew they were true. 25 years of marriage, and in a single moment, she was ready to walk away. Sue, wait, let's not. She hung up, turned off her phone. And for the first time in her adult life, Susan sat in her house in the middle of the day and did absolutely nothing. No cleaning, no cooking, no preparing. She just sat. By Monday, Richard still hadn't come home. He had sent emails, long rambling messages about how much he loved her, how they could work through this, how he wanted to go to counseling. Susan deleted them all unread. When Maria arrived Wednesday morning, Susan was waiting at the kitchen table, coffee already made. Mrs. Mitchell, I heard about Maria stopped, her eyes welling with tears. I'm so sorry. How did you hear? Susan asked calmly. Mr. Mitchell called me, asked if I had seen you, if you were okay. He called you? Something in Susan's chest tightened. Why would he call you? Maria's face crumpled. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to tell you something. I should have told you weeks ago, but I was scared and I didn't know how, and I thought maybe I was wrong, but I can't keep lying to you anymore. Susan felt the room tilt. Tell me what, Maria? I think Mr. Mitchell is seeing someone. Who? Maria was crying now, shaking her head. I don't know for sure, but I've seen things. Texts on his phone when he's left it out. Once I answered the house phone and a woman hung up when I said hello. And the way he acts sometimes, like he's hiding something. Susan's hands were shaking. How long have you suspected this? A few months? Mrs. Mitchell, I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner, but I kept thinking maybe I was wrong. And I didn't want to hurt you if it was nothing. Show me. What? Show me. You said you've seen texts? What did they say? Maria pulled out her own phone with trembling hands. I took pictures. I know I shouldn't have, but I thought maybe if you ever needed proof. She pulled up a photo of Richard's phone screen. A text conversation with a contact saved only as J. Can't wait to see you. Miss you already? She's going to her sister's this weekend. We'll have the whole house. The last message was from 3 months ago, right before Susan had actually gone to visit her sister in Indianapolis for the weekend. The weekend Richard had claimed he was too busy with work to come along. Susan felt like she was watching herself from outside her body, observing this woman whose world was disintegrating with clinical detachment. There's more, Maria whispered, swiping to the next photo. More text, more evidence, conversations about meeting time, about how she didn't suspect anything, about plans for the future. The messages were from different numbers, different contacts, KML, but the content was always the same. Her husband was having an affair, multiple affairs, possibly, and everyone around her had known or suspected while she had remained blissfully, stupidly ignorant. Mrs. Mitchell, please say something, Maria begged. Susan looked up at the young woman she had treated like a daughter, saw the genuine anguish on her face, and felt nothing. The numbness was almost comforting. Thank you for telling me, she said quietly. Can you send those photos to my email? Of course. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. Susan stood up, moving like an automaton. I think I need to be alone today. Would you mind terribly if we skipped cleaning this week? Of course, whatever you need. Do you want me to stay? I can make you lunch, or we could just talk. No, I just need to think. After Maria left, Susan sat in the silence of her home. No, not her home anymore, just a house, and tried to process what she had learned. Part of her wanted to rage, to scream, to destroy everything Richard had ever touched. But a larger part felt only a vast, echoing emptiness. How long had she known? Really? How long had she sensed the distance, the lies, the betrayal, but chosen to ignore it because acknowledging it would mean her entire life had been a waste? She called her sister Linda, in Indianapolis. Susan, is everything okay? Linda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Of course. What is it? When you saw Richard and me at Thanksgiving 2 years ago, you pulled me aside and asked if everything was all right. Do you remember? Linda was quiet for a moment. Yes, I remember. Why did you ask me that? Another pause. Sue, I don't think, please. I need to know. Linda sighed. Because he was glued to his phone all day, texting someone and smiling, in a way I'd never seen him smile at you. And when you spoke to him, he barely acknowledged you. It was like you were invisible. I was worried. Did you think he was having an affair? Yes. But you seemed so happy, and I didn't want to put doubts in your mind if I was wrong. Susan laughed. That bitter sound again. You weren't wrong. I was just blind. She spent the rest of the day going through the house methodically, looking for more evidence. She found it everywhere, once she knew to look. Receipts for restaurants she had never been to. Credit card statements showing charges at hotels in Cincinnati. Why would he need a hotel in his own city? ATM withdrawals for cash, hundreds of dollars at a time, with no explanation. In Richard's dresser, tucked into a sock, she found a burner phone, a cheap flip phone that still had some battery life. She turned it on with shaking hands. The text history made her physically ill. Messages to someone named Angel. Explicit photos sent and received. Plans for meetings. Declarations of love that Richard had never expressed to her, not even in the beginning. But it was the most recent message, sent just 2 days ago, that made Susan's blood run cold. Don't worry about Susan. She doesn't suspect anything. She never does. We can keep this going as long as we're careful. I'm not giving you up. Susan dropped the phone like it had burned her. He thought she was stupid, blind, so thoroughly under his control that he could carry on an entire secret life and she would never notice. The rage that swept through her then was unlike anything she had ever felt. It was cleansing, energizing, transformative. She wasn't a victim. She was a woman who had been lied to, manipulated, and betrayed. But she wasn't broken, not yet. Susan picked up her own phone and called her daughter. Mom, is everything okay? Emily, I need the name of that lawyer friend of yours. The one who specializes in divorces. Mom, what's going on? I'm leaving your father. And I'm going to make sure he regrets every lie he's ever told me. Her voice was steady, strong. And for the first time in 25 years, Susan felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. At war, the lawyer Emily recommended was a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in high-asset divorces. They met in her office in downtown Cincinnati the following Monday, the city skyline gray and imposing through the windows. Tell me everything, Patricia said, pulling out a legal pad. Susan laid it all out: the 25 years of marriage, the emotional distance, the changed passcode, Maria's photos, the burner phone, the receipts. She spoke calmly, methodically, surprising herself with her composure. Patricia took notes, nodding occasionally. When Susan finished, The lawyer looked up with something like admiration in her. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm going to be direct with you. What you have here is enough to establish adultery as grounds for divorce, which in Ohio can affect the division of assets and potentially spousal support. But if you want to really protect yourself, we need more. We need to know who he's been seeing, how long it's been going on, whether he's been using marital assets to support this relationship. How do I get that information? Patricia smiled. You become someone you've probably never been before. You become strategic. Over the next week, Susan followed Patricia's advice. She turned her phone back on and responded to Richard's messages, telling him she was willing to talk, maybe even go to counseling. She asked him to meet her at home the following Wednesday, Maria's regular date, to discuss things rationally. Richard jumped at the chance, relief evident in his eager responses. He wanted to believe everything could go back to normal, that he could smooth this over with some apologies and promises. Wednesday morning, Susan woke at 4:30 for the last time in that house. She dressed carefully not to please Richard, but for herself. She made coffee but didn't prepare breakfast. When Maria arrived at 8, Susan pulled her aside. Maria, I need you to do something for me, and I understand if you say no. Anything, Mrs. Mitchell. I need you to leave at 10 and come back at noon. And I need you to come in the back door when you return, very quietly. Maria's eyes widened with understanding. He's coming home. Yes, and I'm going to catch him in whatever lie he's planning to tell me. But I need a witness, someone who can testify if necessary. Will you do this? Of course. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm so sorry for everything. If I had just told you sooner, Susan took her hand. This is not your fault. None of this is your fault. You've been more loyal to me than my own husband. At 9:30, Richard's truck pulled into the driveway. Susan watched from the kitchen window as he got out, checked his reflection in the side mirror, straightened his shoulders like a man preparing for battle. She met him at the door. He tried to hug her, but she stepped back, gesturing him toward the living room. Richard, we need to talk. I know, and I'm glad you're willing to hear me out. He sat on the couch, looking earnest and concerned. Sue, I know I've been distant. I know I've put work ahead of you, ahead of us, but I want to change. I want to go to counseling, work on our marriage. You mean everything to me. Susan watched him deliver this, watched his carefully practiced sincerity, and felt nothing but cold clarity. Who is she? Richard blinked. What? The woman you're sleeping with? Who is she? Sue, I told you. I'm not. Susan pulled out her phone and showed him the photos Maria had taken. Watched the color drain from his face. Want to try that again? Where did you get those? Did you go through my phone? Sue, that's a violation of my privacy, your privacy. Susan's voice was dangerously quiet. You're having an affair, and you're worried about privacy. I can explain, then explain. Explain the texts. Explain the hotel charges. Explain the burner phone I found in your sock drawer. She pulled the phone from her pocket and tossed it on the coffee table between them. Richard stared at it like a snake. You had no right. I had every right. I'm your wife. Or have you forgotten that between all your appointments with Angel, the name made him flinch? Good. Susan wanted him to hurt, wanted him to feel even a fraction of the pain she had endured. It's not what you think, Richard said, running his hands through his hair. It's complicated, complicated. Susan laughed. You're fucking someone else. That seems pretty simple to me. Don't be crude, Susan. It doesn't suit you. And infidelity doesn't suit you, Richard. But here we are. They stared at each other across the coffee table. 25 years of marriage reduced to this moment of ugly truth. Fine, Richard said finally. Yes, I've been seeing someone. But Sue, you have to understand, our marriage has been dead for years. We're roommates at best. When was the last time we were intimate? When was the last time you looked at me like you actually wanted me? Susan felt like she'd been slapped. Are you seriously trying to blame me for your infidelity? I'm not blaming you. I'm explaining context. You checked out of this marriage years ago, emotionally. You became so focused on the kids, on the house, on being the perfect little homemaker that you forgot how to be a wife. I checked out. Susan's voice was rising now, control slipping. I wake up at 4:30 every morning to make you breakfast. I clean your house, wash your clothes, pack your lunches, manage every aspect of your life so you can focus on work. I gave up everything, my education, my dreams, my identity, to support you, and you're telling me I checked out? All of that is obligation, Sue, not love. You do all those things because it's your job, not because you care about me. The accusation hung in the air, and Susan felt something crack wide open inside her chest. Because there was a grain of truth in it, wasn't there? Somewhere along the way, caring for Richard had become a duty, not a joy. But whose fault was that? When did it start? She asked quietly. Richard hesitated. Does it matter? Yes. 3 years ago. Susan felt the air leave her lungs. 3 years. Not a one-time mistake. Not a moment of weakness. 3 years of deliberate, sustained deception. Who is she? That doesn't matter either. Tell me her name. No. Tell me her goddamn name, Richard. The front door opened. They both turned. Maria stood in the doorway, frozen. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, looking equally shocked, was a young woman Susan recognized. Alina Martinez, Maria's cousin, who had come to their home once or twice over the years, who Susan had chatted with briefly and found charming. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The way Richard had always been particularly interested when Maria mentioned her cousin. The way Alina had seemed nervous that one time Susan had asked her to stay for dinner. The way Richard had suddenly started needing late installations right around the time Alina had moved to Cincinnati 3 years ago. No, Susan whispered. Please, no. Maria's face was white. Mrs. Mitchell, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know until last week. Alina told me everything. That's why I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't find the words. You. Susan looked at Alina. This girl, who was barely 30, who was Maria's family. It's you. Alina's eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. Richard told me you two were separated, that the marriage was over, that you were just staying together for appearances. Get out, Susan said quietly. Mrs. Mitchell, get out of my house. Alina fled. Maria started to follow, but Susan grabbed her arm. Not you. You stay. I need you to see this. She turned to Richard, who looked like a cornered animal. Alina, Maria's cousin. A girl young enough to be your daughter? Sue, listen, how many others, Richard? How many women have there been? Because those texts from the burner phone mentioned multiple names. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. How many? Richard's face hardened. You really want to know? Fine. 7. Over the course of our marriage, 7 women. The number hit Susan like a physical blow. 7. Not one affair, but a pattern, a lifestyle. When did it start? She asked, her voice eerily calm. Emily was 2. Susan's legs gave out. She sank onto the couch, unable to process what she was hearing. Emily was 30 now. For 28 years, her entire married life essentially, Richard had been unfaithful. Why? The question came out as a whisper. Why marry me? Why have children with me? Why waste my entire life? Richard had the decency to look uncomfortable. I did love you, Sue. I do love you. But I also need more. I need excitement, passion, things you stopped providing. I stopped providing. Susan looked up at him, and something in her expression made him take a step back. You destroyed me. Piece by piece, year by year. You took everything I was and reduced me to a servant. And when I had nothing left to give because you'd drained it all away, you blamed me for being empty. That's not fair. Susan stood, and she was shaking now, trembling with rage so profound it felt nuclear. You want to talk about fair? I gave you 25 years, Richard. I gave you my youth, my body, my dreams, my entire identity. I molded myself into exactly what you said you wanted. And it was never enough, because the problem wasn't me. It was you. You're a liar, A man so pathetic and insecure that you need a parade of women to validate your existence. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're weak. And you're a coward. And I'm done. Susan walked to the front door and opened it. Get out. Take your things and get out of my house. Sue, you can't just. It's my house, Richard. My name is on the deed. My inheritance from my parents paid the down payment, in case you've forgotten. So yes, I can. Get out. Now, Richard looked at Maria, who refused to meet his eyes. Then back at Susan. Something in her expression must have convinced him she was serious, because he grabbed his jacket and walked toward the door. He stopped next to her. You'll regret this. You can't survive without me. Susan looked him dead in the eye. Watch me. After he left, Susan closed the door and locked it. Only then did she allow herself to collapse. Sliding down the door until she was sitting on the floor, Maria rushing to her side. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Alina was involved. She only told me last week, and I was trying to figure out how to tell you it's okay, Susan said. Though it wasn't. Nothing was okay. It's not your fault. They sat there together on the floor, Maria holding Susan while she cried 25 years' worth of tears. And when the tears finally stopped, when Susan felt emptied out and hollow, she made a decision. Maria, I need you to testify. In the divorce, I need you to tell a judge everything you've told me. Of course, whatever you need. And I need you to help me find out everything. Every affair, every lie, every dollar he spent on them. Can you do that? Maria nodded fiercely. Yes, Mrs. Mitchell, I'll do whatever it takes. Susan stood, helping Maria up with her. Good, because I'm not just leaving him. I'm going to make sure he pays for what he's done. For every lie, every betrayal, every year he stole from me. She walked to the window and looked out at the quiet suburban street, at the life she had built that turned out to be nothing but a beautiful lie. He thinks I can't survive without him, Suzanne said quietly. He's about to learn just how wrong he is. The divorce proceedings began the following week. Patricia Chen proved to be as ruthless as her reputation suggested, going after Richard with the precision of a surgeon and the determination of a warrior. The evidence Susan had gathered: phone records, hotel receipts, witness testimony from Maria. Even a statement from Alina admitting to the affair painted a damning picture. Ohio courts might not have been as generous to wronged spouses as they once were, but adultery still mattered, especially when it involved the systematic dissipation of marital assets. Patricia subpoenaed Richard's business records and discovered what Susan had long suspected. He had been using company funds to wine and dine his mistresses, taking them on weekend trips disguised as business expenses, even putting one of them on the payroll as a consultant who never actually consulted on anything. Richard fought back, hiring an expensive lawyer who tried to paint Susan as a vindictive wife, seeking revenge. He claimed she had been emotionally distant, that the marriage had been dead for years, that he deserved to be happy too. But the facts were the facts. 7 affairs, 28 years of infidelity, thousands of dollars in marital funds spent on other women while Susan had clipped coupons and shopped at thrift stores to save money. The deposition was brutal. Susan sat across from Richard and his lawyer in Patricia's conference room, the air thick with tension and barely suppressed rage. Mrs. Mitchell, Richard's lawyer began, his tone dripping with condescension. Isn't it true that you haven't worked outside the home in over 25 years? That's correct. So you've been entirely financially dependent on my client. I've been managing our household, raising our children, and supporting my husband's career for 25 years, yes? But no actual employment. Patricia cut in smoothly. Counsel, if you're suggesting that being a stay-at-home mother and wife isn't work, I'd be happy to calculate the market value of a cook, housekeeper, accountant, childcare provider, and personal assistant working 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We're looking at a minimum of 6 figures annually, none of which Mrs. Mitchell was ever compensated for. Richard's lawyer moved on quickly. Mrs. Mitchell, How would you characterize your intimate relationship with your husband over the past 10 years? Susan met Richard's eyes across the table. He looked away first. Non-existent, she said clearly. My husband stopped being intimate with me approximately 8 years ago. He claimed he was tired from work, stressed about the business. I believed him. I didn't realize he was simply getting his needs met elsewhere. And did you ever consider that your own lack of interest might have driven him to seek affection outside the marriage? Objection, Patricia snapped. Victim blaming. Move on. But Susan held up a hand. No, it's fine. I'll answer. She leaned forward, her gaze steady. For 25 years, I was available to my husband emotionally, physically, and spiritually. I made myself into whatever he said he wanted. If he needed space, I gave him space. If he needed attention, I gave him attention. I cooked his favorite meals, wore the clothes he liked, kept myself in shape despite bearing 2 children. And you know what I got in return? 7 affairs. A secret phone, lies upon lies upon lies. So no, counselor, my lack of interest didn't drive him anywhere. His lack of character did. The room fell silent. Even Richard's lawyer seemed at a loss for words. The deposition lasted 6 hours. By the end, Richard looked haggard and defeated. Susan felt strangely energized, powerful in a way she had never experienced before. As they packed up, Richard approached her in the parking garage. Sue, please, we can still fix this. Drop the divorce, and I'll end things with Alina. We can start over. Susan looked at him really, looked at him and felt nothing but pity. Richard, you don't get it, do you? This isn't about Alina. This isn't even about the affairs. This is about the fact that you never saw me as a person. I was a service provider to you, nothing more. Someone to cook and clean and manage your life while you did whatever you wanted. Well, I'm done being invisible. You're not invisible. Sue, I love you. No, you don't. You love having someone take care of you. That's not the same thing. She walked to her car. No, not her car anymore. The car she had bought with her settlement advance from Patricia. A modest Honda, paid for in cash, that belonged to no one but her. Richard called after her, but she didn't look back. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. The judge, a severe-looking woman in her 60s, had clearly been unimpressed with Richard's behavior. Susan got the house, 60% of the marital assets, and substantial alimony for the next 10 years, enough to live comfortably while she figured out her next. Richard got supervised visitation with the grandchildren. Emily and Michael had both sided firmly with their mother. His business, and a steep child support obligation for the 3 children Alina had just revealed were his. The day the divorce was final, Susan sat in Patricia's office, signing the last of the paperwork. What will you do now? Patricia asked. Susan smiled. Live. For the first time in my life, I'm going to actually live. She started small. She enrolled in community college at the University of Cincinnati, taking art classes she had dreamed about for decades. Her paintings were tentative at first, rusty from disuse, but the professor saw potential and encouraged her to continue. She reconnected with old friends she had lost touch with over the years. Women who had once been her confidants before Richard had gradually isolated her from everyone but him and the children. She took Maria out for lunch and insisted on paying, thanking her for her courage in coming forward. Maria cried and hugged her, and they remained close friends. Though Susan no longer employed her, they were equals now, not employer and employee. She traveled, first just short trips around Ohio, then further. She went to New York and stood in the Museum of Modern Art, crying in front of paintings she had only seen in books. She went to Colorado and hiked in the mountains, feeling her lungs burn and her legs ache, and reveling in the physical proof that she was alive, present, real. 6 months after the divorce, Emily called with news. She was pregnant. Susan was going to be a grandmother. I want you to be there when the baby comes, Emily said. Not just as a helper, but as Mom. I want you to be there as you, the real you. The one I've been getting to know these past few months. Not the person Dad made you into. Susan cried happy tears for the first time in longer than she could remember. A year after the divorce, Susan had her first art show at a small gallery in Cincinnati's Over-the-Rhine neighborhood. It was a modest showing, just 8 paintings, all exploring themes of transformation, rebirth, and rediscovery. The pieces were raw, honest, sometimes painful to look at. One depicted a woman's face reflected in a shattered mirror, each shard showing a different age, a different version of herself. Another showed hands emerging from darkness, reaching toward light. The opening night was attended by maybe 30 people, friends. Her children, Maria, some classmates from her art courses. Patricia came and bought 2 paintings, insisting Susan was underselling herself. But the person whose presence meant the most was Susan herself. She stood in that gallery, wearing a dress she had chosen because she liked it, not because it pleased anyone else, and felt truly seen for the first time in her life. A young woman approached her near the end of the night, a journalism student from the University of Cincinnati doing a profile on late-blooming artists. "What would you say to other women who feel trapped?" the student asked. Susan thought for a long moment. "I'd say that you're stronger than you know. I'd say that waking up is terrifying but necessary. I'd say that you deserve to be more than someone's service provider or accessory. You deserve to be whole." She paused, looking at her paintings on the wall, evidence of her journey, proof of her existence. "And I'd say it's never too late. I'm 54 years old. I spent 25 years in a marriage that slowly killed me, piece by piece, but I survived. And now, for the first time, I'm not just surviving, I'm living. Really, truly living." The student scribbled notes furiously. "Any regrets?" Susan smiled. "Only one. I regret not doing this sooner. But I don't regret doing it at all." That night, after the gallery closed and everyone had gone home, Susan walked through the quiet streets of Cincinnati alone. The late spring air was cool and fresh, the city alive with possibility. She thought about the girl in that high school graduation photo, the one with dreams in her eyes. She thought about the woman who had woken at 4:30 every morning for 25 years, slowly disappearing into duty and obligation. And she thought about who she was now, still figuring it out, still discovering, still growing, not perfect, not healed, not entirely, but free. Susan stopped at a corner and looked up at the sky, where stars were just beginning to appear in the deepening twilight. And she made a promise to that 17-year-old girl, to the 40-year-old woman, to every version of herself she had lost along the way. "I see you. I see all of you. And I promise I will never make you invisible again." She walked home to her small apartment in Clifton, decorated exactly how she wanted, filled with her art and her books and her life, felt, for the first time in decades, complete. The betrayal that had buried her marriage alive had, paradoxically, given birth to her true self. And while the scars would always remain, they were proof not of her weakness, but of her strength. She had survived. More than that, she had transformed. Susan Mitchell, at 54 years old, was finally, gloriously, undeniably alive, and she was just getting started.